Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 60th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1987. Norman Jewison was back in the Oscar race with a charming romantic comedy led by Cher. Moonstruck was a high watermark in Cher's acting career, and her chemistry with co-star Nicolas Cage helps make the small-budget film one of the highest-grossing of 1987. The film went on to win 3 Oscars in major categories, including Best Actress, but it was not able to overtake the much more traditional The Last Emperor in Best Picture. So why did Moonstruck come up short despite its likable cast and razor-sharp screenplay? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Moonstruck. And welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today I have another returning guest. One of my favorite people I've ever had on the show, and that is a Gold Derby colleague of mine. He has a personal blog, The Awards Connection, and he is one of the most knowledgeable people that I talk to on film Twitter about the Oscars. So welcome back to the show, Andrew Carden.
Oh my God, I am so excited to be here. I cannot wait to talk about 1987, about Moonstruck, and I think it's so appropriate that I am here today talking to you about 1987, the year Dirty Dancing came out. Because anytime, Kevin, I'm with you, I have the time of my life.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
You're welcome.
We last spoke on The Curious Case of Benjamin Button for anyone who wanted to listen to the previous one, so here we are again. All right. So today, as you said, we are going to be talking about Moonstruck, which is, from what I can tell, very much an Andrew Carden movie. So,
oh, yeah.
So get ready, folks. So let's get into a quick summary of Moonstruck. It is a romantic comedy about a 30-something Italian-American woman named Loretta Castorini, who lives with her parents after being recently widowed and gets engaged to a new man, Johnny Camerari. And soon after, Johnny flies to Sicily to be with his ailing mother and tasks Loretta with inviting his younger brother, Ronnie, to their wedding. And while Loretta and Ronnie kind of get off on the wrong foot at first, they ultimately start to have feelings for each other, and they act on those feelings. And it prompts this big moral conflict within Loretta. And meanwhile, we are also following the comings and goings of Loretta's philandering father, Cosmo, her frustrated mother, Rose, and her dog-walking grandfather. And so the film was directed by Norman Jewison with an original screenplay by John Patrick Shanley. The film stars the indomitable Cher as Loretta, Nicolas Cage as Ronnie, Vincent Gardenia and Olympia Dukakis as Cosmo and Rose, Fyodor Schiapin Jr. as the grandfather, and Danny Aiello as Johnny. We also get little supporting performances by John Mahoney, Louis Gus, Julie Bavasso, and Anita Gillette. So Moonstruck made $80 million at the box office, pretty big hit, and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, winning 3 of those, but not Best Picture. So, Andrew, Moonstruck, go.
I don't even know where to start. Well, let me say this. So when I think back on, let's say, the 5 best romantic comedies of the 1980s, I think Tootsie, I think Working Girl, I think Hannah and Her Sisters, When Harry Met Sally, and I think Moonstruck. I think that'd be my top 5 of the 80s, perhaps among all comedies, not just rom-coms. I mean, this is career best work from so many people involved. It's one of Norman Jewison's best films, if not the best. You have to keep in mind, Norman Jewison is coming off of Agnes of God, which is one of the lousiest movies to ever receive Oscar nominations in Oscar history, I must say. So this was a
Hmm.
huge comeback for him.
Yes.
Um, Cher, I mean, we'll talk about Cher. She is
Yeah.
heavenly in this movie. Nicolas Cage is irresistibly odd and bizarre and delightful in every way. The supporting cast is amazing. They've never been better, from Vincent Gardenia and Olympia Dukakis to John Mahoney, who is amazing in his little role. It is just an all-around fabulous film. The soundtrack is wonderful. John Patrick Shanley's screenplay is fabulous, and it's a complete 180 from work that he would later do.
Hmm.
I mean, this is a masterpiece in romantic comedy of the highest order.
There you go. So yeah, pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah. This was like the third or fourth time that I'd seen Moonstruck. I just watched it again. I mean, I had literally watched it again earlier this year, but I was just like, you know what? I'll throw it on again. Why not? Because it's just one of those really enjoyable movies that you can just watch over and over and still kind of get things from it and just enjoy this incredibly eclectic family and everyone that surrounds them. And just the way that Norman Jewison manages to kind of keep all of the plates spinning as far as the different storylines and weaving everything in and out without feeling too forced or just, awkward. Each story feels like really compelling. You just get drawn into these characters, the dialogue, the repartee they have between any characters, even like people like her aunt and uncle just having conversations themselves. It's just such meaty material.
It's
And
so true, and there's not a single actor in this movie that goes to waste.
exactly.
Everybody gets something juicy to chew on. You mentioned her aunt and uncle, who are
Mm,
played by Louis Gus and Julie Bavazzo.
yes.
They have a marvelous scene together when it's the full moon.
Oh
So
my
I mean,
God.
Norman Jewison, he assembled one hell of a cast, and he gave each and everybody something great to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, all the way down to the most minor of characters. It's just like an actor's dream. And you can
Yes.
tell that this is a guy who comes from theater who is like very much immersed in these sort of dialogue heavy, actor friendly sorts of productions.
Oh
And
yeah, I think if the SAG Awards were around back then, this would have been, I think,
uh,
a virtual shoe-in for best ensemble.
absolutely. I mean, there's broadcast news which has a very good cast as well, but I think
Yeah.
Moonstruck, just the amount of material that every single character is given, it has to, especially with all like those character actors, veterans, Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, let's just talk first about Cher.
Hmm.
So Cher is a few years off of her first Oscar nomination for Silkwood.
Hmm.
This is kind of a big comeback. This is a big year for her. She has three different movies out, including The Witches of Eastwick, and she also has this Moonstruck, which is this very big Oscar play. And
Hmm.
she's like on the cover of all these magazines, very much in the conversation. And this to me is probably one of the best leading female roles in a romantic comedy that there's ever been. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
there's a lot said about whether or not she should have won Best Actress, but like her performance is just so natural and authentic. And even when she's putting on that thick New York Italian accent, she just manages to slip into it so naturally and
The thing to keep
works
in mind
so
too
well against everyone. Yeah.
is that her most recognized film roles prior to this were in Silkwood and in Mask, two
Yes.
very sad films in which she's, in really, um, they're certainly not the lightest affair. Let's put it
Right.
that way. And this is a delightful, heavenly romantic comedy, and she is just such a natural for that.
Hmm.
She just devours John Patrick Shanley's screenplay. I mean, she has some line deliveries in this that are epic.
Yes.
I mean, she radiates. She has such an amazing screen presence. She seems to have chemistry with everybody on screen. I mean, she is just all around fabulous in this. It really is one of the all-time great leading turns from an actress in a romantic comedy.
For sure. Yeah. And there's a lot to be said for like how she interacts with Nicolas Cage, but even just the way she speaks with her parents, the different way she speaks with them, and just kind of the big grand gestures that they have with each other, and they're just so like direct. It's just so much fun to watch.
And all of these actors, they play off of each other so beautifully. I mean,
Yes.
Cher and Gardenia and Dukakis. I mean, Cher is a huge name, and yet she disappears into the role of Loretta like right
Yeah.
away. You just totally buy her, and you buy Vincent and Olympia as her parents. I mean, they're so lived in. It feels so natural. You just buy it right from the get-go. It's not a false note to be found anywhere in this film.
Yeah. And she, of course, has that iconic snap out of it line, which
Oh, yes.
is overplayed, but it still is effective every time.
Well, see, I think the stuff before that's even funnier. They
Yeah.
pick her up and she's just like, take it out on me, take it out on me.
Yes.
Take me until there's nothing left until the bone.
Yes. And the two of them just get like so broad, but it's still very much in keeping, I think, with the film. You know, it doesn't take you out of it too much. So
It is broad, but it's not over the top to the point where
right.
it rings false.
Yeah, exactly.
This doesn't feel like they're giving performances on a stage, like to the last row of the balcony. I mean,
Right.
it still feels really lived in. These
Oh,
are
yeah.
really enthusiastic people.
Yes. And let's just talk about their chemistry, her and Nicolas Cage. Do you buy that these two people could be naturally just drawn to each other almost immediately?
I think so. I mean, I think that you sense that there's a real longing in Loretta for, a fiery, unpredictable kind of guy like Nicolas Cage. The total opposite of Danny Aiello in this.
Very much so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, she's kept that suppressed, and when Nicolas Cage enters, she just can't hold it back anymore. I mean, he is weird, but there's a sexiness to him that she just can't resist. And again, I think you buy it.
Yeah.
When I think Cher and Nicolas Cage, they don't necessarily seem compatible on paper, but in this, I mean, they just hit it off right away.
Right. And she compares him multiple times in the film to a wolf.
Yes.
And like he actually does kind of like resemble a wolf in some ways in some of these scenes. Just kind of the wild hair and the beard. And just there is just like this animalistic quality to him in this movie that like I understand kind of like the appeal of someone like that to someone like her and vice versa.
There's a certain grace and sophistication to him, especially during the opera scenes.
Right, because he loves the opera, which is a great touch.
Inside of him, there's been things that he's been wanting to get out. Go to the opera, be among folks who aren't just baking bread 24/7.
Yes.
So both of these people, they have a real longing, and in each other, they're able to find that.
Yes, I think they're very much these kind of old souls who like that sense of kind of courtship, but just kind of that again that animalistic quality of just being drawn to each other. And and you contrast that with her and Danny Aiello, and there's like no chemistry whatsoever. No. And he's just like this basic businessman who she likes him, which Olympia Dukakis' character likes because and that's a nice touch that comes in at the end as well, which is to say like, oh, it's good that you're marrying someone who you don't like passionately love.
Right.
Yeah.
But Olympia is so good in this too. I mean, we'll talk more, but I just love that her opening words are, "Who's dead?
Who's dead?" Yeah. Which is like such a classic line you would expect from a woman like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, let's actually just talk about Olympia here because she wins Best Supporting Actress for this, and one of my favorite of the 80s by far, if not my favorite, Best Supporting Actress winners is she's just such a natural, so lived in, so authentically this Italian matriarch, and just kind of her little mini quest that she goes on through the film of trying to figure out why men chase women and trying to get confirmation from men about like why this happens and having her little insecurities about knowing that her husband is having an affair is just really fascinating.
She just takes the Shanley screenplay and she just goes to town with it. And I think she especially comes to life in her scenes with John Mahoney. They have a wonderful rapport in this movie. He plays a character who on the page, he's not the most sympathetic of guys. He's this 40-something NYU professor who chases girls half his age.
Right. And gets drinks thrown in his face all the time.
Exactly, yeah. And anytime he goes to dinner at this little Italian restaurant, he wants he wants a big glass of vodka, and he wants any trace of his date removed.
Yes.
And yet he and Olympia hit it off right away too, not on a romantic level, but they have a certain understanding of each other too.
Right.
And there's a deep loneliness in these two people that draws them together, I think. I especially love when they're walking home and, he asks if he could come in, would you like to see how the other half lives?
Yes.
But, ultimately, she knows who she is. She's a wife and she's faithful.
Yeah.
But gosh, the scenes with them are so sweet. And you definitely wouldn't expect that.
Yeah. I just love that entire sequence where she meets with John Mahoney and has this weird little mutual understanding, as you said, but knows within herself that it's not in her nature to just go off with this other man,
Yeah. She calls him a little boy who likes to be bad.
Exactly.
Which I think he totally understands.
Yeah.
And I think he sees in her, a lot more depth than in the girls that he's been with.
Absolutely. Which is why he's so drawn to her. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they do oddly enough make a really compelling pair, I think,
They sure do. And honestly, I wish that John Mahoney could have factored into Best Supporting Actor this year.
That's exactly what I was thinking on this watch. Like, that is such a great small role.
Yeah, I'm only about 10 minutes of screen time, but boy, he does everything he can. And John Mahoney's, he deserved so much more. I believe he won a Tony Award in his career, but he never won an Emmy, and
right.
I think he certainly deserved an Oscar.
Even after all those years on Frasier. Yeah.
I know. What an actor.
Yeah. And he's recently departed. I think he died in February or something. So, yeah, very tragic loss there.
Absolutely.
So,
unfortunately, a lot of this cast has passed on.
Right. Yeah, I was looking that up. Like Vincent Gardenia, like a lot of these the character actors.
Plus, they've all passed on. So.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, watching the film now, it's still hilarious, but you just miss these actors so much.
Yeah, and I think that does actually just make it more profound. The fact that they left these great performances on the screen.
Yes.
So, I want to talk about some of the music through the film, which is a very important part of it, I think. Starting with that very classic "That's Amore" that just really just draws you right into the world, this madcap, just beautiful, romantic Italian world that they're living in.
Yep.
So great. And all the little operatic pieces throughout the film, from La Boheme, inside and outside the opera, are just really nice touches.
There is one scene in this film that strikes a false note, I think, and it's a scene where Sherry's getting ready for the opera, and she's in front of the fireplace, and the camera, it's very warm, and they have this 80s saxophone music going on in the background. That felt a little false to me. It's still enjoyable just because, it's Cher, and but that seems odd comparative to the rest of the music, which was so grand, and of course, Vincent Gardenia has that record, "It Must Be Him," going on in the background the whole time, the Vicky Carr song, which Olympia thinks is so obnoxious.
Yeah.
It's just, the soundtrack is fabulous all around.
It is. And speaking of that scene, like, I did not, for some reason, I've seen this film 3-4 times now. Watching it now, I just didn't even remember that this scene took so long. Like, it feels like it's kind of a long scene.
It's really not a necessary scene.
Very drawn out of her just kind of getting ready in front of the fire.
It's the sort of scene that you'd find in something like Barbra Streisand's Mirror's Two Faces, where it's just like the camera's focused on her legs, and
it's like
going up and down, and the music's like softcore porn music.
Yeah.
But I still, it's not bad. It's just odd comparative to the rest of the movie.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually wanted to go back to a line from a scene that you referenced. There's just so many great scenes in this. I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but there's so much to get into with this. Between the aunt and the uncle, and where the uncle is looking out the window. The moon is so big, almost like cartoonishly big outside their window. and he's kind of bathed in the moonlight. And then the aunt looks at him and says, I wrote this down because whenever I watch this, I like get teared up.
Yep.
When she just looks at him so lovingly and she just says, you know, in that light with that expression on your face, you look about 25 years old.
Yep, it's amazing. And I love the morning after when they're in their store and he's singing like, isn't it romantic? And she's totally embarrassed. But the two of them are hilarious. I love when toward the end of the movie, Julie Bavasso answers the door for Danny Aiello.
Yeah.
She comes back and she's like, Johnny Camilleri.
That's what I mean. It's just like these little touches that just make these characters come to life.
I know.
Yeah. And speaking of just great quotes, going back to how Rose does not love how Loretta is in love with the Nicolas Cage character by the end. And that obviously very classically mirrors the beginning where she is expressing how like she likes the Danny Aiello character but doesn't love him, and she's like, you know, that's good. And by the end we have this great line between the two of them where she's like, you love him, Loretta? And you know, Loretta's like, Ma, I love him awful. And she just goes, oh God, that's too bad.
Well, don't forget when Cher comes home from that evening and she's like, you're throwing your life down the toilet, you've got a love bite on your neck.
Yes. And I read that toilet line was actually improvised by her. So
I could see that.
Yeah.
Okay, can we also talk about the food in this movie?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God. Olympia Dukakis is making like the most amazing eggs I've ever seen.
I know.
Even her oatmeal looks so good. And then all the bread that Nicolas Cage bakes, it's so shiny. It looks so delicious.
Yeah.
So good.
That's the thing. All these like little touches throughout the film, even from the little food to the music, all these things just create this beautiful tapestry.
And then the old man's dogs, they eat very well.
Yes. And I just love his little silent exchanges with everyone, especially when Olympia Dukakis and John Mahoney are kind of arm in arm walking down, and then he sees them with the dogs, and they exchange this little look and go about their business.
Yeah. And then at the table at the end, I'm confused.
I'm confused. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a lovely film is how I would describe it. And another thing I love about the writing here is that it manages to be very profound without, you know, putting on airs about what it's trying to say, you know, kind of the idea of literally being moonstruck, which is this idea of falling in love with someone and not being able to really explain it and chasing your natural impulses.
Yeah.
I think that theme is spread throughout each and every storyline in such a compelling way.
Yeah. I mean, this film does not have a single moment, again, that rings false or that's overly sentimental or mawkish. But, I mean, there are moments in this that are absolutely devastating, especially between Vincent Gardenia and Olympia Dukakis at the end.
Yes.
I mean, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
She tells him, you know, he's got to stop cheating on her, got to stop seeing her. And then he just slams the table and he's like, okay. And then he talks about how his life is built on nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that's just a devastating moment. Both of them are incredible.
Yeah, and she says, your life is not built on nothing. Yeah. And then he has that lovely te amo, which is just so great.
Yeah. The movie ends on such a great note, you know, when they toast a family and the music swells. And then the camera goes to, I presume it's the great-grandparents.
Yeah, I think so,
portrait. I mean, Jewison just staged this film so beautifully.
Exactly, yeah. And speaking of staging, like, this ending here really is where it starts to feel like kind of a play, you know, where all of the characters just come in and out of the ending scene. And it's just like this big chaotic ensemble piece at the end, which is just
we also haven't mentioned my favorite line of the entire film, where Danny Aiello comes and he says, I can't marry you. And he and Cher get into a little bit of spat. And she says, in time, you'll drop dead and I'll come to your funeral in a red dress. amazing.
That is just a killer line.
Oh my
She has
god.
so many great little singers in this.
Oh, she's
And the
amazing.
way she delivers it is just so like, yes. Yeah.
Everybody's pitch perfect in this.
Yeah. I want to go back to the opera scene because that's another one of these sort of profound scenes, I think, where she's watching the sort of love story. She doesn't truly understand a lot of what's happening, but she gets so enraptured in it. I think that's a really well filmed scene. I love the little tear streaming down her cheek and the way they just kind of silently express their love for each other next to each other. I
Yeah.
just love that as kind of a centerpiece of the film, in addition to the fact that we have all the comedy of like her seeing her father at the opera with his mistress.
Yeah. At the same time, I find it that kind of sad when she does see Vincent and Anita Gillette, and she
Right.
goes to Nicolas Cage, and she's like, "That woman's not my mother."
Yeah,
I mean, as funny as these situations are, there's also a sadness to them too.
exactly.
I think Anita Gillette's great too as Mona. It's not really much of a role. She doesn't get a scene like others do, but I do enjoy her in this. And
Yeah,
we haven't spoken, a ton about Vincent Gardenia, but God,
yeah,
he is pitch perfect in this too.
he really is. Just honestly, from his first scene alone, where he just has all these like gestures,
I
it's
know.
just like the physical comedy, even is
Yeah.
just so great. And about talking about all the bad luck that she has, you know.
Yeah, it's true. He is
So
wonderful.
he is.
And
Like
he really left us too soon. I believe he passed away not long after Moonstruck came out. I think in the early 90s.
yeah, I think it was like
Um,
92.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he was such a great character actor. He was wonderful on All in the Family back in the 70s. He
Mm.
was a prior nominee for Bang the Drum Slowly. He really should have been around for decades to come. And I think it's really tragic that he passed away.
Yeah, absolutely. We lost a lot of really, really great actors here.
Yeah.
Um, but some of them are still kicking, like our old friend
Yes.
Cher. So,
Oh, yes.
and honestly, looking at this, it just does make me want to see her do another just great leading movie again.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
I
she
think she's
hasn't.
still got it, you know?
Oh, definitely. She hasn't had a role on this caliber at this level
Right.
since Moonstruck, really. I think her follow up was Mermaids,
Yeah.
which is a perfectly fine film, but it didn't reach the sky high heights that this did.
Right. Yeah. And some of that is probably, of her own choosing,
Yeah,
just not really wanting to go back to the acting world again. But
yeah,
I do definitely think she has something else in her.
absolutely.
One more great classic leading role
Yeah.
from her.
And Olivia Dukakis, I would love to see it in a goofy
Yeah.
supporting role. I mean, she steals scenes in everything from this
Yeah.
to Magnolias, even to something like Look Who's Talking. I
Hmm.
mean, she's somebody who came around kind of out of nowhere. She was
Yeah.
very acclaimed on the stage, but in the late '80s, she just came out of nowhere. She's also in Working Girl
She was a
randomly
working girl.
as
Yes, I remember seeing that. I was
the
like,
role
oh,
as like
hello.
receptionist or something.
Yeah.
Not sure what she was doing there, but she is a delight anytime she comes on screen.
Absolutely. I feel like watching some of these like late 80s, early 90s films, I've just kind of been constantly talking about how I want to see some of these actors doing these things again, even all
Yeah,
these years later. I feel like that's been like a recurring theme through my past few shows.
I
It's
know.
just wanting to see them.
Obviously, I'd love to see Nicolas Cage in a film that's half as
Well,
good as Moonstruck. That
yeah.
hasn't happened in a very long time.
Yeah. Interesting that he does not get a nomination for this. He does
I
get Golden
know.
Globe nomination, but I
And
don't.
he was a real up and comer at this point. I mean, he was in Peggy Sue Got Married.
Mhm.
He was, coming on strong. So I'm surprised he really wasn't an Oscar nominee before leaving Las Vegas.
Right. But she
Um,
does win for. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
another
But
Oscar
I
winner in
think
this
there was
cast.
I mean, that's the thing. There was a sense that he was due for an Oscar, even though he'd never been nominated for an Oscar.
Right. Yeah.
So in a way, I'm surprised that he didn't manage one for this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Which
is
I
kind
think,
of a performance that I think kind of is on the fence between lead and supporting. He
yeah,
was
that's
campaign lead.
right. That's what I was
You
gonna say.
couldn't make an argument that he's supporting it.
Yeah. Hmm. he got his Oscar, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But yes, as far as just the film itself, I highly recommend if you have not seen it. It's a cool hour 40 minutes. It's on Amazon Prime, so if anyone has that, you have no excuse. Please watch the film. It is, like we said, just an absolute classic beyond its genre, even beyond the romantic comedy. It's just a classic 80s film that I think still holds up.
Yeah. If you're listening to this podcast and you haven't seen Moonstruck, get on that now.
Well, I do have more casual listeners.
It's true.
So Moonstruck. It's a great movie. What can I say? So when we come back, we will be talking about why Moonstruck did not win Best Picture, because it lost to a very big movie called The Last Emperor.
The moon brings the woman to the man, capisci?
The moon is a little like love.
Will you marry me?
I will marry you. I will be your wife.
Do you love him, Loretta?
No.
Good. When you love him, they drive you crazy.
Sometimes
Why are you marrying Johnny? He's a fool.
it makes you act a little crazy.
Where are you taking me?
To the bed.
Oh, God. Okay, I don't care. Take me to the bed.
Isn't it romantic?
You got a love bite on your neck. Your life's going down the toilet.
You'll have your eyes open for you, my friend.
I have my eyes open.
I'll say no more.
You haven't said anything.
Que bella luna.
You ruined my life.
That's impossible. You ruined my life.
Look, it's Cosmo's moon.
Why do men chase women?
Nerves? I don't want to talk about it.
That moon. That crazy moon.
Now you talk.
I love you.
What?
Snap out of it.
I'm confused.
They say there's nothing new under the sun.
Wait a minute.
But under the moon, that's another story.
You love him, Loretta? Ma, I love him awful. Oh, God, that's too bad.
Cher, Nicolas Cage, in a Norman Jewison film.
A la familia,
Moonstruck.
And we're back. So now we are going to talk about why Moonstruck lost Best Picture to a movie called The Last Emperor. So Moonstruck received 6 Academy Awards nominations, not wins. And those were, I know, right? Should have swept the whole thing. Including Best Picture, Best Director for Norman Jewison, Best Actress for Cher, Best Supporting Actor for Vincent Gardenia, Best Supporting Actress for Olympia Dukakis, and Best Original Screenplay for John Patrick Shanley. And it won half of those. It won 3. It won for Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Original Screenplay, which is extremely good haul. And I think very clearly makes this a number 2 in this particular race. They clearly loved it.
Yeah, I mean, none of the other films won an Oscar. So.
Right, exactly. Literally, yeah. Broadcast News, Fatal Attraction, Hope and Glory did not win an Oscar, so that made my job much easier as far as figuring out what the runner-up was. So, before the Oscars, Moonstruck won the WGA for the original screenplay, and meanwhile, The Last Emperor won the Golden Globe for drama and the DGA, and the rest of them were kind of all over the place. So, let's talk about just why we think Moonstruck was not able to win Best Picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard enough for romantic comedy to win Best Picture when it's the only romantic comedy. When you have 2 romantic comedies in there, right. I think it's all the more difficult a task. The Last Emperor was it was a frontrunner for Best Picture, but it wasn't a shoo-in guaranteed to sweep like it did. Moonstruck had a strong base of support. There were folks who did like Hope and Glory too. So, I mean, The Last Emperor, which, we'll discuss more, it's one of those old school Hollywood epics that tends to resonate quite a bit with the Academy. And in the 80s, films like this really did well. You had a film like Gandhi, a film like Out of Africa. In a lot of ways, his ceremony is very much like the 1982 ceremony. In that you had, in 1982, you had E.T. and Tootsie, 2 huge box office hits. And that was one of the highest rated telecasts, or most watched, because you had the two highest grossing films of the year, and everybody presumed it would be a brawl between these two films. Of course, Gandhi ended up winning.
Yeah.
1987, you have Moonstruck and you have Fatal Attraction, two monster box office hits. Fatal Attraction made so much money this year. And this telecast was really widely watched too. It got terrible reviews, the telecast. But it was widely watched, and people who thought it would be a brawl between Moonstruck and Fatal Attraction instead watched as this movie, The Last Emperor, just steamrolled the entire telecast, much like Gandhi did 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of deja vu in this ceremony.
Right. And I feel like for people just watching at home, maybe not even knowing about The Last Emperor, being like, what is this thing? Apparently I have to check out The Last Emperor.
The Last Emperor was even less of a commercial success than Gandhi.
Exactly.
So I think folks were just flabbergasted by this film winning every single Oscar, despite not even getting a single acting nomination. I mean, that's amazing that it pulled that off. I mean, if I were predicting back in the day, I would hesitate to even go with Last Emperor in Best Picture because it has no acting nominations.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think Broadcast News and Moonstruck, they kind of they targeted the same kind of pool of voters who like a more lighter piece of cinema. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I think they kind of canceled each other out. Fatal Attraction was never winning Best Picture, and Hope and Glory, I mean, it had its small base of support, but it was never really going to win Best Picture. And it also had no acting nominations.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting race. I feel like when you look at it, I think it's very clear, even if you haven't seen the movies, that The Last Emperor was going to win based on the past however many winners from the 80s especially. It had that grand scale. It was global. It felt like important. People felt smart if they were watching it, and it's very profound, especially compared to probably all of these movies. And so I think it's pretty undeniable, especially with the added story of Bernardo Bertolucci having access to the Forbidden City in China. And there's just the prestige element to the film just made it pretty undeniable. And I almost wonder, like, if the movie was not in contention here, if Moonstruck actually would win, or if it might just be something like Hope and Glory, because that's another movie that's a little more on the profound side, quote unquote, even though it's about kids.
I just can't picture it. Hope and Glory was not a commercial success at all domestically. It's a tough call, though. I think that Moonstruck could win. I mean, when you have three major wins like that, I think so. And I think that Norman Jewison was starting to be viewed as due for a Best Director Oscar at that point. So I think it's plausible that he could have won. I suspect, I mean, if Last Emperor is not in there, I suppose you have Empire of the Sun come in there.
That's true.
And then you have two World War II coming-of-age stories. Now, talk about canceling each other out.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, Norman Jewison had In the Heat of the Night, so there was still, a little bit of the...
thing to keep in mind, too, is that, Last Emperor was a Columbia Pictures release. Now, Columbia had a horrible 1987 earlier because they had Ishtar, and they lost like $40 million that summer on that film. So The Last Emperor was like a gift from the heavens to them. They also had Hope and Glory too, for what it's worth.
There you go. Yeah. So I don't know what would have happened there. I do feel like maybe another, kind of important quote unquote movie of that sort, like Empire of the Sun, maybe could have taken it, but I'm not positive.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to consider. But, Moonstruck, I think it could kind of have that like almost Annie Hall type of a win sort of thing, where it's just kind of this romantic film that's on the smaller scale budget that, it could happen.
Could. And the thing with Broadcast News is that there was no urgency whatsoever to give James L. Brooks another Oscar after Terms of Endearment. But there was an urgency to reward Norman Jewison, who, his film did win Best Picture in the Heat of the Night, but he hadn't won a Best Director Oscar. So there was a sense of, he's due. There wasn't that for James L. Brooks in Broadcast News.
Exactly. So. Yeah. But we did get a few interesting questions / comments about this particular race because a few people mentioned that they did not exactly love this Best Picture lineup, including Mensa316, who said, initial thought, one of the weakest Best Picture lineups ever. Interested to hear if others feel the same. Personally speaking, I do not feel the same because I generally like all of these movies. So
I agree.
I don't think there's a major stinker in the bunch, even Fatal Attraction, so.
Yeah. For me, Hope and Glory would be the fifth. And I think there's still a lot of good things in it. There's not a rotten movie in this bunch. And there are a lot of, in the 1980s, there's a lot of films that did not belong in Best Picture.
Right.
And that's really not the case here. I mean, there were certain films that certainly deserved to get in and didn't. But on the whole, I think it's a pretty decent lineup. And I think that The Last Emperor is a pretty decent winner, even if I personally prefer Moonstruck.
Yeah, I don't know. But there is... well, we'll get to Fatal Attraction in a little bit, but Ronnie Castle mentioned that Fatal Attraction is probably the worst Best Picture nominee ever. And I definitely don't agree with that. I would consider watching more of the Best Picture nominees because I don't think it's, I mean, I understand why people say it's kind of like this a little bit trashy, very crowd pleaser, but maybe in a bad way, sort of thing. Indulgent.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a blast. I do
too. Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about it more, but I mean, Glenn Close. I mean, the acting in the movie alone, I think, definitely makes it not one of the worst Best Picture nominees.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, like we were kind of saying, it is a very much a lineup that people are very familiar with, even 31 years later. People still go back to broadcast news. It's in the Criterion collection. So is The Last Emperor. And Moonstruck is this classic everyone loves. Fatal Attraction, even if people haven't seen it, at least understand what the phrase Fatal Attraction means and what that connotes,
Yeah.
So maybe Hope and Glory not so much, but
yeah, I mean, Hope and Glory is the one that just didn't make, I mean, everything else made a fair amount of money. Hope and Glory, I think, topped out at about 10 million domestically.
Yeah.
But all of the others made, I think, at least 40.
Yeah.
So Hope and Glory is the one film in this that, a lot of folks haven't seen.
Right.
And I don't think they necessarily need to see it. But...
Yeah. It's okay, it's not like a bad film. It's just, I don't know if I would have nominated it for Best Picture, but I'm not actively mad about it. But we did get a few questions about The Last Emperor, and that was including Gordon, which is at Mark Wahlberg. He said, do you think The Last Emperor deserved to be nominated for any acting awards? If so, for whom and who would you replace? So like we were saying, I do think it is odd that The Last Emperor does not get an acting nomination, including Peter O'Toole, at the very least. I mean, I know he's the one white guy in the film, but...
It honestly, I mean, that's the thing. Best Supporting Actor was really strong this year.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure who we would have replaced in Best Supporting Actor, honestly. The real weak category was Best Supporting Actress, honestly. And I think that Joan Chen would have been a really deserving nominee.
Yeah, sure.
There. And then John Lone does a terrific job as Pu Yi. He did get a Golden Globe nomination. I think he would have been deserving of a nod in Best Actor. And I'm kind of surprised he didn't. He was a real up-and-coming actor at the time. He had been in Year of the Dragon a couple years earlier, which also got him a lot of acclaim. So it kind of baffles me that he didn't make the cut. But again, it's one of those cases is who would you boot of the lineup, to make room for him? And I'm not sure who would have dropped out of Best Actor to make that room.
Yeah, because both of those lineups I think are very ironclad.
Yeah,
and so it's
the one category that was kind of a ghost town was Supporting Actress. So I really think it should have made more of a push for Joan Chen down there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Joan Chen, and I actually like her in Twin Peaks as well, even though some people don't. But
I like her too.
Yeah, so that would have been a nice nominee.
With the exception of Olympia Dukakis, I think Best Supporting Actress is kind of a lousy lineup this year.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these films even are not exactly the most well remembered. I mean, even Anne Archer is decent in Fatal Attraction, but like,
Yeah, but I mean, she's fine. But I mean, I don't know if you've seen The Whales of August, but Anne Southern does
no.
absolutely nothing in the movie whatsoever. Like literally nothing.
Yeah. So
And then I mean, Anne Ramsey and throw her off from the train. I mean, yeah, she's Mama, but it's the most one-note performance. It's funny for a few minutes, and then it's like, okay.
yeah, I don't know what happened this particular year. It's just, and I believe, do any of these people get nominated again? I don't think so.
No. I mean, the Norma Alejandro nomination was a total makeup for her not getting in for the official story a couple years earlier, which she absolutely deserved the nomination for. Anne Southern and Anne Ramsey, they were two old timers. They're kind of career nominations, especially for Anne Southern. What's crazy is that if you look back at some of the coverage for this Oscar year, a lot of folks actually predicted Anne Southern to win as a career Oscar.
Okay.
She actually aggressively campaigns for the film. Was this little indie, and she went out and she did interviews with everybody, and a lot of folks thought she might pull it off because I mean she was, a star of the silver screen, and she had her own sitcom in the 50s. Thankfully, she did not win because that would be honestly one of the worst Oscar acting wins.
Right, and honestly, beating Olympia Dukakis is just kind of like. I think she. I mean, again, I haven't seen The Whales of August as I established, but like, I just feel like Olympia Dukakis is just so undeniable. Yeah, she just totally owns that role, and I believe she wins a Golden Globe too. So, but going back to the original question, I would say that Joan Chen for sure. I would love to see, and John Lode. I don't really know what happened there, and Peter O'Toole. We did get actually 2 questions that were the exact same, which were basically from Joe Armando and another person that I can't find. Oh, Cameron McRae. They both asked why we think Peter O'Toole did not get nominated, especially considering his amazing Oscar track record. It seems like almost a gimme nomination for a movie they love so much.
Yep, I mean, he did have full page ads. I've seen them for Best Supporting Actor. Best Supporting Actor was just really crowded that year. If you look at the Golden Globe nominees, it's almost totally different from the Oscar nominees. You had Arlie Ermy for Full Metal Jacket, which is an iconic performance today.
Love him in that. Yeah.
You also had Richard Dreyfuss for Nuts, which was a movie that had a huge Oscar campaign as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know who you'd kick out for him. I've always thought, honestly, that the role is kind of underwritten in The Last Emperor. I've always gotten the sense maybe there were some scenes left on the cutting room floor because
probably,
he seems a little underdeveloped. He never really gets an Oscar scene. He does have a screen presence about him that's still wonderful.
Yeah,
but you keep waiting for that scene where he just breaks out and then he just departs from the film, and that's kind of that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a petering out by the end.
Yeah, it is to say
unintended.
I mean, the Oscars have nominated actors for doing absolutely nothing, as is the case with Anne Southern.
That's what I mean.
So in a way, it is surprising.
Yeah.
But I mean, they made room for Albert Brooks and Vincent Gardenia, who actually didn't show up in a lot of the precursors.
I know.
So I am happy about that.
Yeah. So again, that probably shows that there was more support for Moonstruck than people initially might have thought. So
yeah.
So I want to get to some of these other movies in the race, including broadcast news. We got quite a few questions about that, kind of people wanting us to cover that. So broadcast news, as we said, it is the James L. Brooks follow-up to the Best Picture winning, Best Director winning Terms of Endearment. And I love it. I haven't seen it in a few years actually at this point, but I still have very fond memories of it. I love Holly Hunter in it. She's just so spunky and fierce and totally commands that role. So emotional, very internalized, very externalized. Just I'm kind of obsessed with that performance.
She is fabulous. The film itself doesn't hit me on the same level that Moonstruck or Terms of Endearment does. I think it's a very strong and sharp comedy. It almost has the feel of some of the work that James L. Brooks did on the Mary Tyler Moore Show in the 70s. Again, really sharp, witty comedy. There are individual scenes that I absolutely adore. For instance, Joan Cusack running across the studio to get the tape in time. Holly Hunter's, again, brilliant. Albert Brooks has never been better, I don't think.
Oh, yeah.
He's fabulous in this movie. I think William Hurt, I mean, he's playing a character who's supposed to be kind of vapid. But, William Hurt toward the end of the 80s gave a lot of performances that I thought were kind of on the lifeless end.
Agreed. Well, I just talked about The Accidental Tourist, so...
Yeah, and in which he's even more bland.
Yeah.
In broadcast news, at least, there's a purpose to that. His character is supposed to be that way.
Right.
But I spend the movie thinking to myself why... I find myself questioning why Holly Hunter would be attracted to him over Albert Brooks. Albert Brooks, I mean, he has blood flowing through his veins. He's brilliant, and I mean, William Hurt's a pretty boy, but there's just nothing really there.
Right.
So, I don't know. I don't really buy that she would have such a conflict. I feel like it'd be an easy call for Albert Brooks. But
right.
Then again...
Plus, he's just, charming and naturally funny, and,
Yeah. I mean, if I were to boot anybody out of Best Actor, it would be William Hurt.
Yeah, I would be okay with that. I mean, I always feel bad because I feel like people do really love William Hurt and kind of revere him in some ways, but for me, I just I haven't really responded to a lot of his roles. Yeah, even in his prime here,
Yeah, what's odd is that in Kiss of the Spider-Woman, he gives a really rich, lively performance.
Yeah.
And then in the films afterwards, Children of a Lesser God and this, Accidental Tourist, they just seem to become more and more laid back. There's just not much there. He almost doesn't really seem to be trying that much. He really lets his leading ladies upstage him big time in all of those movies.
Yeah.
So,
which I'm sure they appreciate.
Yeah, he's supposed to be kind of bland in this, but at the same time, I don't know. It's hard to get terribly excited about his performance.
Yeah.
I also love how Jack Nicholson shows up just for the hell of it.
Yeah, I know. Always good. And so Ethan Gordon asked, why wasn't broadcast news the biggest thing of all time? You want to take that one? Why was it not the biggest thing of all time?
Well, James L. Brooks, he had unreasonably high expectations for his follow-up to Terms of Endearment, which, I mean, he was never going to meet. What's amazing is that he basically met them among critics. They liked it just as much as Terms of Endearment. The reviews were incredible for broadcast news. It ended up sweeping the New York Film Critics Circle pretty much down the line. But it didn't resonate on the same level as Terms of Endearment commercially. It did just fine. It made back its money. It was a hit, but it wasn't a blockbuster like Terms of Endearment. I mean, that was a legit blockbuster movie.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this didn't even resonate as much as good as It Gets did in the 90s. I just don't think people could relate to these characters as much as they could to the mother and daughter in Terms of Endearment.
Yeah.
So, it's a great movie. I don't know if it's the greatest movie of all time, but it's a good one.
Yeah, I do really love it, and I think it actually does hold up better today, maybe than even how it was then, because there are parallels with how it's kind of satirizing the news and things like that. So these are very relevant things that a lot of us are thinking about these days. So
absolutely, it definitely holds up for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And Sebastian Gronbach said, broadcast news, 0 wins and no director nomination for a film that was the follow-up to a Best Picture winner, What Happened? So we kind of covered that a little bit, but why do you think the directors did not go for this?
Oh God, I mean, the Lasse Hallström nomination, I don't know much about the Oscar campaign behind My Life as a Dog. I presume that it was a pretty aggressive behind-the-scenes effort.
Yes, that's what I was reading in Inside Oscar, that it was very much an aggressive effort, lots of splashy sort of packages given to Academy members, things like that. So
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I think with broadcast news, the praise for it was really in the acting and the writing. Folks didn't necessarily points out Brooks' direction as the best part of the picture. I certainly think he did deserve a nomination, but again, it's not terribly surprising just because there wasn't a huge urgency to give him more Oscars after Terms of Endearment.
Yeah, I think, just probably expectations, probably in the end.
Yeah.
And I mean, looking at the director lineup, it's all the Best Picture nominees except Broadcast News is replaced by My Life as a Dog, Lasse Hallström.
Yeah, it didn't win a single Oscar. It didn't win a single Golden Globe.
Yeah.
It just, won some critics awards. It kind of stinks. It'd be interesting to consider what would happen to it if Terms of Endearment just didn't exist.
That's
if this
true.
was his first film.
Yeah, I
that
think it
would
would
change things.
Probably a different narrative for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading about how like a lot of the critics just fell head over heels for Broadcast News, and for it to kind of stumble when it got to the major prizes.
Well, I think the critics related to it more on a personal level than a lot of audiences did.
Right, which makes sense.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So let's see. Do you want to talk a little bit more about Fatal Attraction? Because
sure.
It is one of the definitive Glenn Close performances.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned last week, Glenn Close still doesn't have an Oscar. This is one of her biggest roles that people still talk about, like saying, why did she not win this Oscar?
It seems that everybody says that about everybody in this category. How did Holly Hunter not win this Oscar? How did Glenn Close not win this Oscar? How did Sally Kirkland not win this Oscar?
We'll get to that.
So Fatal Attraction. So
yeah,
keep in mind, Adrian Lyne's 2 movies before this, the director of Fatal Attraction, were Flashdance and 9.5 Weeks. 2 pretty terrible films, honestly. Now, no offense to Jennifer Beals and Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger, who can be very good actors in certain projects. They weren't in those. But Michael Douglas, Glenn Close, and Ann Archer do significantly more heavy lifting on Fatal Attraction than those actors did in those pictures.
Yeah.
They just kind of went with the flow in those other films. I mean, those are legit trash. This film, on the other hand, has 3 actors who are really operating at the tops of their game. I think Michael Douglas is actually better in this than he is in Wall Street, which he won his Oscar for.
Yeah, I can see an argument
for that. All 3 are marvelous. The editing is very strong. I especially like when they're on the roller coaster and Ann Archer's getting into her car accident. I love the editing there.
Very subtle. Very subtle.
It's very well edited. It's an exciting movie. I mean, it is a trashy movie.
Yeah.
It is. I can't deny that. I think the screenplay is way too easy on Michael Douglas and too hard on Glenn Close. But Glenn Close is wonderful in this. In most years, she would totally be my pick for the win for Best Actress.
Yeah.
I mean, she has so many great moments. I especially love when she and Michael Douglas are playing in the park with his dog. And she mentions how her father had died, and then she says, I was just kidding, he's alive somewhere.
That is so great. Oh my God.
That's a fabulous moment. And I actually prefer the theatrical ending to the original cut.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know. I could see how the original cut makes more sense on paper, but I think that Adrian Lyne's staging of it in a theatrical cut is just so exciting on kind of a horror movie level, but I don't feel that excitement from the original cut. The original cut really is a downer.
Well, I would say we should probably explain it for those who don't know quite what we're talking about. But by the end, to establish what the film is, it's Glenn Close, who is this kind of working woman who has an affair with this married man, Michael Douglas. His wife is Ann Archer. They have this sweet little relationship, but then he goes off and is a mistress and all that. So by the end, she becomes quote unquote crazy and starts to kind of stalk him and want to be more involved in his life because she feels like, he can't just go off and have this affair and then her just go back to her life because she has a life too and she won't be ignored. So by the end, what happens in the actual theatrical cut is kind of a revenge of Glenn Close is in the bathtub. She's being drowned, and Anne Archer character ends up shooting her. It's this big splashy ending, and the big villain dies essentially. And that's kind of what audiences wanted to see happen to this woman versus what was actually in the original cut on the page, which Glenn Close and the director and many other people fought for, which was basically Alex Forrest, Glenn Close's character, framing the Michael Douglas character for her murder. So she commits suicide. And it kind of mirrors the Madame Butterfly that's kind of this resonant theme throughout the film. And so she tries to frame him for murder, and then she sends this tape to the Anne Archer character and kind of explains that this hadn't actually happened so that she can basically acquit the Michael Douglas character. But at the same time, she's still kind of revealing the fact that he had this affair with her. And it kind of ends in that sort of way.
Yes.
It's much more of a tragedy, sort of a dramatic, almost Shakespearean kind of ending that is probably a little more sophisticated. And I will say, I clearly understand why people preferred the way it actually ended, because it is more visceral, and sometimes it feels more in keeping with how the film is kind of going towards this big climactic moment versus what actually is on the page here, which is kind of not that. So
I suppose it's my fondness for 80s slasher movies.
Perhaps.
It makes me prefer the theatrical ending. I just love the shot of the water leaking from the ceiling when Michael Douglas is making the tea. Because basically, they're basically trying to drown each other upstairs, Anne Archer and Glenn Close.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally a splashy ending, and that there's a lot of splashing going on.
Right.
So I think it's just very well staged.
Yeah, it is definitely well staged. It's one of these things where the producers literally had to give everyone $1 million to go back and restage the ending, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess so. And so Glenn Close really, really fought to not have this happen because she felt very attached to her character. She felt that it kind of cheapened, didn't feel like the proper ending for her character and for this story. And personally speaking, I do kind of side with her. I do like the alternate ending. I think it's more poetic and profound and smarter. So, there's that element, but at the same time, the ending that is also very exciting. It's not the kind of thing where I was watching it and I felt like, oh, that was a weird way to end it. It makes sense that it's driving towards this, but at the same time, knowing what could have been,
Either way, it is not one of the worst Best Picture nominees of all time.
Yes, thank you. Yes. But we should mention that this was not exactly the most predicted film to get into Best Picture. It didn't exactly get too many precursors. It was a bit of a surprise.
It just made a ton of money.
Yeah,
and I think that was definitely a huge factor. I mean, Paramount's only had, I believe they had this and they had The Untouchables. Mm-hmm. And The Untouchables never really took off. It was more of a summer blockbuster than it was an Oscar contender.
Yeah.
So ultimately that kind of fell off to the side and they really focused in on Fatal Attraction, and it worked, even if it didn't work in terms of wins.
Right. And so Brandon Stanwyck asked, if Cher had won for Silkwood, do you think it would have gone to Glenn Close this year instead? I don't think so. That is my opinion. I think it would have gone to Holly Hunter or Sally Kirkland, maybe. Who knows?
Agreed completely. It's one of those two.
Yeah.
I don't think Cher would have won. Again, there wouldn't be that urgency there to give her a second Oscar so soon.
God. Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough call. Holly Hunter was the favorite of the critics.
Right.
She certainly was.
Swept the critics. Yeah.
Yeah. Even at LA Film Critics, she and Sally Kirkland actually tied. So imagine if they tied at the Oscars. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about Anna and Sally Kirkland now or later. But
we are approaching that point. Yeah. So
there is an argument to be made that if everyone had seen Anna, that Sally Kirkland would have won.
Yeah, I think so. I really don't think this would have gone to Glenn Close. I think it was just such a polarizing movie to begin with, and a polarizing character. And it's very hard for Oscar voters to vote for female performances that are villainous. So
I think she would have been fourth even if Cher had won for Silkwood.
exactly. So yeah, that's kind of a bummer, just knowing that probably her most iconic role is like fourth out of 5 contenders.
Well, she was definitely ahead of Meryl Streep. I'll give her that.
Yes, we know that Meryl Streep in Ironweed was last. No, she's good in the movie, but there was no urgency with that film. So,
in my opinion, that's a total waste of a nomination. For one, I think she's supporting an Ironweed, and she also kept out both Faye Dunaway for Barfly and Barbara Streisand for Nuts, who would have been such fun nominees in this category.
Oh my god, yeah, imagine just that combination of women in this category.
Or Barbara Streisand among them. Oh my god.
Good lord. So many divas. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so since we're bridging the gap here, before we get into the should have been a contender segment, I think we should talk about one of the biggest narratives of this year that I was tweeting about today and you were commenting on today as well, and that is the legendary campaign of Miss Sally Kirkland.
Oof. Legit one of the all-time greatest Oscar campaigns in any category.
Yes.
And there's nothing that will top it. Melissa Leo tried to do her best Sally Kirkland, but no, that was not a Sally Kirkland level campaign.
You want to take this one? I know you're very well versed in the Sally Kirkland of it all.
So the film is Anna.
Yes.
And so basically Anna, it's basically an art house all about Eve. Sally Kirkland portrays this actress who was once very famous in the 50s and 60s in independent cinema. And now she's struggling off Broadway in the 80s, struggling to land even like small roles. Into her life comes this beautiful 20-something named Christina, played by Paulina Porskova. And essentially they end up having a Bette Davis and Baxter relationship where Paulina Porskova rises as Sally Kirkland's Anna, just can't get anywhere. So that's basically the story of Anna.
Yeah.
So Anna was picked up by Vestron Pictures, which in the 1980s was famous for doing horror B movies, which usually made about $3 million at the box office. They were not a serious distributor. But somehow they got their hands on Anna, and they also actually got their hands on John Huston's The Dead, believe it or not. So Vestron Pictures did not have a lot of money for an Oscar campaign. They actually had Dirty Dancing this year, which was a huge hit, and yet they still weren't able to give Sally Kirkland the kind of campaign that she thought she deserved. And Sally Kirkland did deserve an Oscar campaign. I mean, it's a tough movie to find because it's not streaming, which is a shame. You have to buy the DVD now. Mm-hmm. But this is a true tour de force performance. It's the kind of performance that should be taught in acting schools, honestly. It's really a breathtaking piece of acting. So Sally Kirkland, knowing this is, maybe her one last chance, but let it be said that Sally Kirkland in the 70s had a bunch of bit roles, but in big movies. She was in The Sting, she was in Cinderella Liberty, The Way We Were, A Star Is Born, and the Barbara version. So she finally gets this juicy lead role. She totally kills it. And with Vestron being useless, she decides to mount her own Oscar campaign. And boy, is it one hell of an Oscar campaign. She contacts everybody in the Academy. She writes letters to everyone.
Literally everybody.
Yes. She reaches out to every member of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association at the Golden Globes. If you listen to her speech at the Golden Globes, she won the Golden Globe. She mentions the number of members that are in the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. She had her bases covered everywhere. Now her godmother is none other than Shelley Winters, 2-time Oscar winner. Shelley Winters had screenings at her home for all of the old Hollywood folks. So you had all these big actors coming over to Shelley Winters' home to watch Anna. Now, word got around town about how amazing this campaign was and the performance too, to the point where actors like Jenna Rollins were saying in public that they were voting for Sally Kirkland even though they hadn't actually seen the film. People were they just loved the chutzpah of her campaign. She would take every single interview, no matter how small the publication. She was out there campaigning so aggressively. And I have to agree with her. If enough people saw Anna, I think she easily, I mean, not easily, but I think she could have even won against Cher, had Cher not won herself would.
Wow.
It's really a magnificent performance, and it's one that's increasingly tough to find. I believe that Lionsgate now has the rights to it, and that's after years of it being passed along from distributor to distributor to distributor, to the point where the distributor probably doesn't even realize they have the rights to it.
Yeah.
Kind of sad. But God, it's one hell of a performance, and Sally Kirkland's campaign, I mean, is as breathtaking as the performance itself. I wish more people could see it, because I mean, I could compare it to All About Eve. The film isn't as great as Sally Kirkland's performance is, but her performance in the film rivals Bette Davis in All About Eve.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's very well recounted. It's a really fascinating piece of Oscar history. I feel like people should know about, because it's like just the tip of the iceberg of what you can do for yourself if your movie or your studio is not willing to put up the money, or doesn't have the money, or doesn't have the passion to put some actual effort into getting you some awards attention.
Yeah, in Oscar history, it's very common. It's been fairly common even since, the 50s, 60s, 70s, for an actor to take out their own ads in the trades. You had Talia Shire for The Godfather Part 2 actually took out her own ads, and she got a nomination. Candy Clark in American Graffiti, Diana Scarwood in Inside Moves. A lot of those random nominations that you come across, in a lot of those cases, because the actors took it upon themselves to campaign for themselves, because the studio just proved useless.
There you go.
But Sally Kirkland took it to new heights, and nobody's matched it since.
Yeah. If there was an Oscar for Oscar campaigning.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I just wanted to read a few really great quotes from Inside Oscar about this campaign, which is like a very big portion of the 1987 chapter is just on Sally Kirkland.
Mm-hmm.
And she mentions to People magazine in a 3-page spread, she says, "I will be the happiest woman in the world, and my belief in God will be reaffirmed." If she wins the Oscar, which is just like the most dramatic thing that I've ever heard anyone say in talking about the Oscars. Yeah. And she mentions that Liza Minnelli brought me an antique enameled gold leaf butterfly pin, which her family had passed from member to member for years. Liza wore it the night she won, and she said it brings luck. She told me to wear it that night.
Oh.
And it did not, sadly, bring luck to her. But after she lost, she was a little bit sad, obviously, very dejected. But she mentions that she had a lot of offers after the nomination, which is great.
Well, she's actually in JFK. I don't know if you noticed her. She's, I believe, the first major actor to grace the screen in JFK. She plays, I believe, Rose Charme is her name. She was a psychic, or was she a hooker? I forget, but she's the one who predicted that JFK was going to be assassinated.
Oh my God. Psychic, hooker,
I love her in everything, though.
Yeah. But after that, she's talking about her offers, and she says that she has one that has such a shocking plot, a tragedy, and it's definitely a potential award-winning part. So.
Well, she filmed a Steel Magnolias TV pilot where she played the Dolly Parton role, but it was never picked up the series. Like, imagine that.
That is the juicy part. Yeah. So maybe that was it. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, just a legendary story from this year. You can't talk about 87 without Sally Kirkland. So this was her one and only nomination. She is still acting. She's been in over 200 films. She's still got it. So,
yes.
Okay, so let's move on to our should have been a contender segment, and that is other movies nominated for Oscars or other movies from 1987 that we liked but didn't come anywhere close. So, Andrew, I know you just talked about Anna, but do you have others here that you're pretty passionate about?
I sure do. We're coming up on Halloween, so I
Mm.
gotta include a horror movie. How about Hellraiser?
Oh, nice.
So the Hellraiser series is famous for Pinhead. He's the guy with the bald guy with pins in his face.
Yes.
But the first Hellraiser is actually it finds him more of a supporting role. The film is actually focused on Claire Higgins, who is this marvelous British actress. And basically, she discovers that the corpse of her ex-lover is in her attic. And she can bring it back to life if she feeds him human bodies. So she spends most of the movie seducing men and bringing them up to the attic for her ex-lover to feed on. Now, that sounds absolutely grotesque, but it's done in such a stylish way. And Claire Higgins, I mean, move over, Meryl Streep. You should have gotten that fifth Oscar nomination, that fifth spot, actually. It's a great horror movie, and it's kind of tainted, unfortunately, by the sequels, which aren't on the same level. Beyond that, have you seen Hellraiser?
I think so, but not for a very long time. I remember seeing on cable, but yeah, it's not something that I can speak to any confidence on right now. So
I also have a few light frothy comedies. I have Adventures in Babysitting.
Very good.
Elizabeth Shue, I adore.
Mm-hmm.
I also have Baby Boom with Diane Keaton.
Diane Keaton, yep.
Which is one of the wonderful films that Nancy Meyers and Carl Shire did together.
That's right.
They had done Private Benjamin, Father of the Bride, and Baby Boom, which is wonderful. And also Outrageous Fortune, which is a film I love. You take Bette Midler, who's of course very brassy and larger than life, and then you have Shelley Long, who's of course she's really uptight and she's very la-di-da, and they both love the same man, and the man he dies, but they think that he faked his death, so they go on the run for him, and of course he's a really bad guy, so they end up getting chased by the CIA, who's chasing the guy, and it's just an all-around hilarious buddy comedy, made all the more fabulous knowing that Bette and Shelley apparently could not stand each other behind the scenes.
Really?
They ended up striking a deal. They had a huge fight over who got top billing, and they ended up striking a deal where I forget who got what, but the western half of the U.S., like Shelley Long got top, and then Bette got top billing on the other half.
That is incredible.
It's hilarious. Besides those, I mentioned Barfly and Nuts, both great vehicles for Faye Dunaway and Barbara Streisand. They also feature Mickey Rourke and Barfly, who's brilliant. And then Richard Dreyfuss is great in Nuts as well. And I'd also give a nod to September, which is one of the Woody Allen pictures this year. It's a fascinating production where Woody Allen shot the film, and he wasn't thrilled with the result whatsoever. He ended up reshooting the entire film and fired several of the actors. He initially had Christopher Walken in the cast, Sam Shepard, Maureen O'Sullivan, got rid of all of them. He put in Sam Waterston. He hired Elaine Stritch, who is magnificent in the movie. It's very similar to Woody Allen's Interiors. It's a family drama, not for everybody. It's a little on the slow side, but as somebody who adores most of Woody Allen cinema, especially in the 80s, for me, it's something of a must-see. So I think that's about it. I think it's a really strong year for cinema.
Really interesting. Lots kind of, as you were suggesting, a lot of big actress vehicles that really highlights a lot of really great actresses. So
I mean, if I had my way, I would nominate Elizabeth Shue and Shelley Long and Bette Midler, and Claire Higgins and Hellraiser, and all three of the Witches of Eastwick,
right, including Cher again. Yeah, that's fair. I just wanted to mention Ironweed because, again, we talked about it a little bit, but this is a movie where I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, Jack Nicholson, Meryl Streep, I understand why it was made, but at the same time, how was this movie made? Because like I look at it and I'm like, I'm looking at the appeal for an audience in watching kind of these homeless people in Albany for like 2.5 hours. And it's this really sad story with Jack Nicholson and how he killed his child and had to go homeless. And it's very slow paced. And, you know, and when I watched it, I was like, okay, I mean, it's decent performances. And first of all, I understand why it wasn't a big hit, but I think it just speaks to the power of both of them, and combined with the fact that it's based on a Pulitzer Prize winning book. But interesting film that I feel like has no chance of being made these days.
No,
you know what I mean?
It's a dreary picture.
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson's, I think, in very good form. It's really one of his last not Jack Nicholson-y kind of performances.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. For sure.
Yeah, he's very sad and restrained. I especially love his scenes with Carol Baker, who portrays his wife.
Yes, heartbreaking. Yeah,
but boy, it's dreary. It's slow. It's sad, but it's not sad in a particularly compelling way, I don't think.
What about when Meryl Streep is singing about her pa? That's nice, right?
Yeah, that's honestly the only thing I can remember her doing in the film.
Yeah.
Again, I think that nomination is just kind of a waste. I love Meryl. I adore her. But that nomination could have gone to somebody much more fun.
Yeah. It's probably on the weaker side, even among just movies that people have seen from Meryl Streep. Probably is less seen than most of her other nominations. But at just her performance, I think it's good. It's a Meryl performance. It's not going to be too horrible. But like, it's borderline supporting, I would say. I would kind of agree with you there. Even though she does get some scenes to herself, it's still, she's kind of just like sleepwalking through most of the film ultimately. But
I always get it confused with Silkwood and Heartburn though. the titles are completely, I don't know. I could be talking about that Nora Ephron, Mike Nichols movie, and I could call it Silkwood. It is Silkwood. I could call it Ironweed, sorry.
Well, it's like all these natural elements like silk and iron and weed and wood.
I know.
And you're burning the wood. I don't know what's going on. So, yeah.
I know. And Silkwood is definitely the best of the three pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to talk about that one, actually. Princess Bride, a classic for me as a kid. I just love the beautiful like fantasia of that film. It's just really fun.
Yeah.
And Full Metal Jacket, I like the first half of Full Metal Jacket. The second half gets a little generic for me, but I really love I really like even like Vincent D'Onofrio, I think is very good in his role. And Arlie Army is really fantastic, and he gets a Golden Globe nomination for it. And it's one of these roles that a lot of people, I feel like they know that specific character, like they've seen it in like whatever the case may be, and it's been parodied, that classic drill sergeant role. But ultimately, I think the film it's good. I'm not going to say it's bad or anything, or even average. I just think it's probably on the weaker side of Stanley Kubrick filmography. So,
well, I mean, it's basically two movies. You have the early Ermey scenes with Vincent D'Onofrio, and they are incredible. I think it's right up there with the best of Kubrick's filmmaking.
Yeah, so
and then you have the Matthew Modine scenes, which again they are kind of generic and workmanlike, and they don't have that Kubrick flair.
Yeah.
It really is a mixed bag. Back to the Princess Bride, Rob Reiner had one hell of a streak around this.
Oh my god, yes. Like I've been talking about Rob Reiner's entire filmography since the past few episodes.
Continue to, because you have Stand By Me coming up.
I know.
And then This Is Spinal Tap wasn't an Oscar contender, but still that was
still classic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what a streak he had. And then he doesn't really have much of anything going now, which is kind of sad.
Again, I wish he could come back to it, but
it seemed like after, I think, The American President was his last great movie.
Yeah, I'm looking at the filmography now, and that's very much true. People love The Bucket List, but not one of the best by any means.
Yeah, he had one hell of a streak going.
It's crazy. This is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men. Well, then he has North, which is nominated for a Razzie, but and then he has The American President. So yeah, that's just an incredible streak. Good for him.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just want to do a little special shout out to our friend Michael Schwartz, because Spaceballs is also a movie from '87. May the Schwartz be with you. That's it. I just wanted to do a dumb little joke. Mel Brooks. It's classic.
I do love Mel Brooks. He did not get an Oscar nomination, though.
Yeah.
Baseball.
So before we move on to our final segment, I just wanted to get to a few other odds and ends questions, including from Jeffrey Kerr, who asked, despite receiving 6 nominations overall, why do you think Empire of the Sun failed to make the cut for Best Picture? It's a Steven Spielberg movie. Does not get Best Picture. Gets a lot of the technical prizes.
Yeah. It did get nominations, but the reviews, they weren't that spectacular.
Yeah.
It was not a commercial success.
Right.
He was coming off of The Color Purple year, which was really a mixed bag for him.
Yeah.
All the Oscar coverage around The Color Purple was generally negative in nature, and I think there was still a little residue from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, you had Hope and Glory, which was yet another coming-of-age World War II story, and I don't think you can have 2 of them up there.
No, probably not. Yeah.
And
there's a lot of war happening in '87 too.
It's true.
Got Full Metal Jacket too, so it's like.
Yeah, I do prefer Empire of the Sun over Hope and Glory. I think both are flawed pictures, but at the time, I think voters were more inclined to give a nod to John Borman over Spielberg. John Borman had been around and had earned a few Oscar nominations. And we didn't really speak much about Hope and Glory, but this was a much more traditionally Oscar-friendly picture than a lot of his earlier stuff, like The Exorcist 2.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So if you were gonna recognize John Borman, like, this was the time, because this was a very Oscar-friendly piece.
For sure. Yeah, and with Empire of the Sun, I was even looking at like Siskel and Ebert's reviews at the time, and Siskel said, I don't know what the film is about.
Yeah.
And Ebert said it's, despite the emotional potential of the story, it didn't much move me. So, yeah, I just think it didn't necessarily connect as much.
Keep in mind, it was supposed to be directed by David Lean prior to when Spielberg came on board. Had it been a Lean picture, perhaps they would have gravitated to it more, just because, he was such a legend. And a lot of the old timers in the Academy probably would have just given him a picture nod for that alone. Spielberg at this time was not on such great terms.
Yeah.
Among the Academy.
Very shaky. But then Schindler's List happened and all was forgiven.
Yeah. The late 80s were not a great time for Spielberg.
Yeah, very much the weak point in his Oscar success. So
you had Always, you had Hook.
Yeah. Well, let's just one more here, going back to, we mentioned The Dead at one point from John Huston. This is from San Diego Spookorama, and they say, did The Dead from John Huston ever have a chance at a nomination? And if the Academy were so inclined, which would have gotten a nomination, RoboCop or Predator?
Two very different questions.
Very different.
So The Dead, again, it had a really modest release. Vestron was behind it, and Angelica Houston, the star of it, did not embark on a Sally Kirkland level campaign for the film, and nor did John Huston, who was in very poor health by that point. It did, I believe, earn a couple of minor precursors here and there. I haven't looked at it in a while. The reviews were very strong for it, but it wasn't a commercial success. And I think James Joyce's The Dead is generally a piece that doesn't appeal to a particularly broad audience. I think that Houston would have been deserving of a nomination. I think they actually campaigned her down in supporting actress, so she really would have been deserving of a nomination.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, it would have been cool if Houston had earned one more Best Director nom. That would have been great.
Yeah, and we should mention that it does get into screenplay, so it's not like totally ignored. So, as far as RoboCop or Predator, well, they do both get nominations. I think. Does Predator? I think so, for visual effects or something. Yeah,
RoboCop I think got a Best Film Editing nomination.
Yes, it did. Yes, so
yeah. The reviews for both were very, very strong. I'm partial to RoboCop myself over Predator. I think Predator's a little on the campy side at points. But yeah, I think it's cool that RoboCop earns a Best Film Editing nom, especially at this point where voters were a little bit more conservative and stuffy in nature.
For sure, yeah.
RoboCop's a very violent film, and to earn a major nomination like that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I would say of those two, probably RoboCop, not only based on film editing, but just based on the kind of nature of the film itself. Maybe
it also has a really wonderful performance from Peter Weller, who's in much better form than Arnold, as much as I enjoy him.
Well, yeah, and we should also mention that it does come from Paul Verhoeven, so
correct. Yeah,
there's some sort of snob appeal for that, maybe. Who knows? So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a wacky year. It's very fun. Lots of fun actresses. Lots of fun, just lots of great little hits throughout. Yeah. So I think that pretty much covers most of what we wanted to talk about. I don't know if I'm missing anything. I don't think so.
Unless you want to spend another half hour talking about Sally Kirkland.
Shall we? To the minutia of what went wrong there. Yeah, but a 1987, very fun year. I highly suggest you check out like a lot of these movies because it's a great Best Picture lineup, despite what people might say on the internet. So there you have it. Okay, so when we come back, we'll be giving our verdict as to whether we think The Last Emperor deserved Best Picture or if Moonstruck should have taken it.
And in keeping with a great old Hollywood tradition, the Best Picture nominees for Best Pictures are Broadcast News, in which showbiz comes to the newsroom, James L. Brooks, producer. Fatal Attraction, in which adultery comes to scare you to death, Stanley R. Jaffe and Sherry Lansing, producers. Hope and Glory, in which the Second World War comes to England, John Borman, producer. The Last Emperor, in which the modern era comes to China, Jeremy Thomas, producer. And the winner is... Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I know before all of you. Moonstruck, in which passion comes to Brooklyn, Patrick Palmer and Norman Jewison, producers. Are there any more? They blink the thing like, now! And the winner is The Last Emperor, Jeremy Thomas, producer.
And we're back. So now we're going to give our verdict as to whether we think The Last Emperor should have won Best Picture or if Moonstruck should have taken it. Andrew Carden, give me your verdict.
Well, honestly, when I revisited these films, I thought that I might have kind of a head versus heart decision where my head said The Last Emperor and my heart said Moonstruck. But I think my head and my heart are pretty closely aligned on this. I think it's a pretty easy win for Moonstruck for me. I think it's one of the all-time great comedies, and that's not hyperbole for me. I think it is legitimately one of the finest comedies ever produced on film. I think the ensemble is incredible. The acting all around is so wonderful. The screenplay from John Patrick Shanley is a slice of heaven. Norman Jewison's direction is pitch perfect. Everything works for me. The Last Emperor, it's a gorgeous film. It looks beautiful.
Gorgeous.
The opening half an hour, especially when Puyi is young, I think there is so much legitimate movie magic there. And I think a lot of that movie magic isn't quite as present in the rest of the film. I think John Lone is in fine form. I think Joan Chen, as we've mentioned, is very good. But boy, it does not move me in the same way that Moonstruck does. It's not a bad Best Picture winner. It's certainly not among the worst. For me, it probably falls somewhere probably in the middle, but maybe closer to the top than toward the bottom.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly respectable Best Picture winner, much more satisfying than something like Gandhi or Out of Africa, which are also the kind of epics that voters just loved at this time. Yeah, it's a fine film. I'm not going to have a hissy fit that it beat Moonstruck, but I do think Moonstruck is ultimately the more superior film. And Moonstruck's a film that I am probably going to watch 50 more times over my lifetime at least. I might watch The Last Emperor a couple more times. So for me, it's not a close call, even if I completely respect The Last Emperor.
Yeah, that is more or less how I feel as well, and it is actually more head and heart for me, which is I feel like if Moonstruck had won Best Picture and Bernardo Bertolucci had won Director, I'd be okay with that. I would be okay with a split there, because the accomplishment of what Bertolucci was doing, the incredibly difficult task of filming in the Forbidden City and making this 3-hour epic and making it about having this, charting this character over the course of so many years and making it seem authentic and real. I actually do think that the movie is enrapturing throughout, even once it gets beyond when he becomes an adult. I think it's certainly a mood change, and the everything kind of becomes a little more cramped, which I think is a good directorial choice to suggest how Puyi is feeling in his life and kind of feeling overpowered by things. So I appreciate that. I appreciate a lot of the directorial choices with The Last Emperor. And I think it's so hard to look at both of these movies and say this is doing something better than the other, because they both have things that they do better. And they are such different films at the end of the day on a very different scope that it's like almost impossible to even say one is better. But I'm going to have to go with my heart, as I do all the time at this point, I guess, and say Moonstruck. That is what I would say.
Well, I am with you all the way, obviously.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think that Bernardo Bertolucci, I would completely be cool with a split of that Best Picture for Moonstruck and Best Director for Bertolucci. I do think it's rather odd that Norman Jewison doesn't have a Best Directing Oscar for somebody with such a storied career. But you're right, Moonstruck isn't the sort of film that would generally win a Best Director Oscar, even though some romantic comedies like Annie Hall, for instance, have pulled it off.
Yeah.
But boy, they love The Last Emperor.
Yes, they did. 9 nominations, 9 wins.
Ooh, wow.
So, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I love The Last Emperor. I love Moonstruck, but I just feel a lot more emotionally invested in Moonstruck. And like you said, I'm going to revisit it a lot more. I don't even know if I'm going to watch The Last Emperor again. Like it is kind of an arduous experience at times. It's one of these movies that sometimes people say it's like, eating your vegetables in some sense. Like, it's very serious minded. It's not entirely entertaining, quote unquote, on that level that you would want to watch things over and over again, whereas Moonstruck just gives you that. And I think it's so hard to say like a movie that you respect necessarily should be rewarded with Best Picture, as far as comparing it to something that you just love and that a lot of people just love. So I don't know, I think it's one of these really hard decisions you have to make in your mind, as to
I mean, The Last Emperor is a film with great nostalgia for the old Hollywood epics, so much so that it has Lawrence of Arabia himself, Peter O'Toole, in it.
Yeah.
but ultimately it's really not quite up there with Lawrence of Arabia, I
Yeah.
don't think. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and I probably will revisit it at some point many years down the line, but boy, it just doesn't resonate with me on the same level that Moonstruck does.
Right. Yeah. And there's, like I said, there's just a little part in the back of my mind that's like, do I think Moonstruck should win Best Picture over this really high artistic achievement that is The Last Emperor? But I'm going to say yes for now and regret it later. So that's it. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on with me. This was once again a wonderful, very enlightening experience. So thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Such a wonderful year, an even better movie. I couldn't ask for a better time.
Yeah. So obviously you're invited on again in the future since you have a wealth of knowledge even beyond myself. So
I am always down to come back.
yes. So tell the people where they can find you on the internet.
Well, you can find me 24/7 on Twitter. I am at Awards Connect. I am also at Gold Derby with Kevin. And I also have a blog, The Awards Connection, where I do a mix of looking back at the old Oscar stuff and also predict all the new stuff as well.
Very good. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, and you can find the show at Oscar Runner Up. I just passed 1,000 followers.
Yay!
So that's pretty cool. And the show is on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Rate, review, subscribe, all that jazz. And now it's up to you to vote for whether you think The Last Emperor or Moonstruck should have won Best Picture. And you can do that on my website at filmtrophies.com or email me at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So once again, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I will bid you all adieu.